Hey everybody, it's James, and if you need something to look forward to this weekend, this Friday, November 20th, is the start of the 53rd Baja 1000, and the race is awesome. You should totally watch it, and you can actually watch it for free online. I'll put a link in the description for that, and if you don't know about the Baja 1000, it's only, the most famous off-road race in the world. The true history of the Baja 1000 is a little bit like the race itself, because we definitely know where it starts and where it ends, but there's some room for interpretation in the middle, so I will do my best. The first official running of the Baja 1000 happened in October of 1967, but the roots can be traced all the way back to 1962 with a publicity stunt that was either thought up by Honda Motorcycles or a Hollywood stuntman named Bud Eakins. In the mid-1960s, off-road motorcycle riders almost exclusively rode big, heavy European bikes like the Triumph TR6 Desert Sled. Honda had broken into the US market via California in the mid-1950s with light, easy-to-ride, small displacement motorcycles made for city commuters. They were basically step-over scooters, and Honda made dirt bikes, but they weren't really taken that seriously by the real off-roaders because they were less powerful and smaller. Enter Bud Eakins, a Hollywood stuntman and accomplished motorcycle rider. He was actually one of the stunt drivers in the classic car movie Bullitt. Now, at some point, someone got the idea that they wanted to do something to prove that Honda motorcycles were so much more capable than just puttering around a city. So Bud came up with the idea to ride these motorcycles from Tijuana, Mexico, down to La Paz, Mexico, which is a 950-mile stretch of harsh, desolate desert that covers almost the entire length of the Baja Peninsula. And Honda would support this project with two of its CL72 Scrambler motorcycles, a Cessna airplane borrowed from Doctors Without Borders, and two journalists that would follow Bud on his epic journey.
Ow. Holy fucking shit. You bug. Well, that asshole. And we're back.
So, they were all set up, right? No, not even close, because Bud didn't actually want to do the motorcycle ride. You see, Bud was a Triumph dealer, and he didn't necessarily think it was the best idea for a Triumph dealer to do a publicity stunt for a Japanese motorcycle company that was trying to take Triumph's market share. So he did what any good Hollywood stunt double would do. He hired a stunt double, his younger brother Dave, and then the guy that would ride the second motorcycle was a gentleman named Billy Robertson Jr. They all took the borrowed Cessna and they flew from Tijuana to La Paz one time before starting this journey. And I need to make sure we're all clear on this. Two guys that were about to ride 1,000 miles of gnarly desert in a place they had never been to before on a motorcycle that was considered a good beginner bike decided to plan the entire route by flying over it once. And to make things even more gnarly, once they left Tijuana and headed south, they found out that the next place that they could buy gas was in La Paz. So they had to brap down the entire length of the Baja Peninsula with a fuel tank that held less than 3 gallons of fuel, and they had nowhere to buy more. So what was their ingenious solution? Be cool and just ask the ranchers if they could buy some of the gas that a lot of them kept in drums on their ranches. And when they couldn't find a rancher, they would have the plane with the journalists land somewhere and they would siphon fuel out of the wing. And if that wasn't bootleg enough, they decided to time this thing by sending a telegraph in Tijuana, and then they would send another one in La Paz, and they were time-stamped so they could do some math and figure out how long it had taken. So they were using a timing system that was developed in the 1830s. After they had gotten all of their extensive preparation done, they decided to start the journey on March 22nd, 1962. So just after midnight, they sent the telegraph in Tijuana, and they started their journey, and it went just about how you'd expect. They got lost a lot. They crashed a lot, they had some mechanical failures, but eventually both motorcycles would finish the 952-mile rally down a stretch of earth that would become the mecca of off-road racing. The publicity stunt worked, and other motorcycle manufacturers started doing the same route to try to beat Honda's time, and it became a little bit of a proving ground for motorcycles and for four-wheel off-roaders like the Myers-Manx. It wasn't until 1967 that things actually got organized when a guy named Ed Perlin, who was an ex-Marine turned florist, who was also an off-road enthusiast, decided to pull together the first national Off-Road Racing Association's Mexican 1000 Rally. It was 849 miles, and it didn't necessarily have an exact route, but there were 5 checkpoints, and that was huge because these race teams could pre-arrange fuel stops. Now, they still needed the locals to buy into this because they were still needed to race on privately owned land and on public roads. So they did what the Eakins did. They were cool, and they just asked permission. And the locals bought in. The event captivated the local community as much as it did off-road enthusiasts, and the 1967 event was a success. And in 1968, the race would captivate the entire United States. ABC sent a reporter from the wide world of sports down to Mexico to cover the Mexican 1000 rally, and when we all found out what was happening south of the border, nothing could stop this race's momentum. Within a few years, race teams were drawing huge sponsors like Olympia Beer and even bigger names to race like Steve McQueen and salad dressing legend Paul Newman. The race became so important to Baja culture as well as the off-roading community that even when it was canceled in 1974 because of the oil crisis, it happened anyway. The Mexican government stepped in and organized the race, and after that, a guy named Saul Fish started an organization called SCORE, and SCORE has been putting on the Baja 1000 ever since. So a whole lot has changed in the 52-year history of the 1,000-mile rally, but what's awesome is that even more has stayed exactly the same. The course changes every year, sometimes by a whole lot and sometimes only slightly. And by course, I mean the, general direction that the racers should be heading in. And they don't send telegraphs anymore because, GPS exists. But the practice of still politely asking ranchers to race on their private property still exists. In the areas where cops don't want people racing on the public roads, they just go the speed limit. Driver and rider safety has also grown exponentially since the 1960s, and that's a really good thing. So in certain ways, the race is a lot safer than it used to be, but in certain other ways, the race has actually gotten gnarlier. The race gets more popular every year, and spectators drive down the open course to get to the best viewing points. So in addition to having to deal with the already gnarly terrain of the Baja Desert, racers have to deal with actual commuter traffic, as well as herds of cows and changing conditions and legitimate sabotage, because people will build jumps thinking that, it'll be awesome for a truck to go off the sweet jump in front of me, but usually this is what happens. Originally, they split the racers up into two groups, 2 wheels and 4 wheels. But now there are more than 45 different classes that run every year at the Baja 1000, and the big guns are definitely the trophy trucks. They are purpose-built hell on wheels with no restrictions whatsoever for engine displacement or suspension. They sound like the apocalypse, and their shocks allow the rear tires to travel up and down a yard, which is really helpful when you're running over giant rocks and go through the whoop sections and probably hitting some moderately sized chupacabras, which are definitely real because I checked the internet. The other race classes cover a huge spectrum, from vintage trucks to purpose-built buggies to UTVs, quads, motorcycles, and of course, the lovable losers, Class 11. This is the class of entirely stock, original Volkswagen Beetles with drum brakes, 1600cc motors, and all the original bodywork. Which again, all of these vehicles are sharing one race course, so you literally have $1 million, 850 horsepower trophy trucks with suspension big enough to run over a man-eating black demon shark of the Sea of Cortez, which is also real, because I asked the internet, running alongside vintage German economy cars that were developed in the 1940s and have a horsepower to weight ratio that's only marginally better than a golf cart.
Break.
It's literally like running the 24-hour Le Mans on the same track at the same time as the 24 hours of Lemons. It's organized chaos for almost 1,000 miles of unrelenting punishment for both the drivers, the riders, and the equipment. And they all have stories that sound completely made up, but they're real. And unfortunately, another thing that is all too real is the risk associated with off-road endurance racing, because when the unthinkable happens and a driver gets injured, it's a backcountry survival situation. And unfortunately, like so many other iconic races, there is a certain history of tragedy. As recently as a couple of years ago, a driver named Mark Latala, who's also a father, died in a head-on collision with another race car driver. And on paper, the risk-reward doesn't make any sense, because this weekend, the four-wheel vehicle that finishes first, I think, gets $25,000, and they're going to have to spend a couple $1 million to get it. But there's also hundreds of other privateers that spend their own money and spend their own time to build their own vehicles, knowing that the best prize that they can hope to win is just to get to the finish line. Oh, Jesus. Oh. I need a minute. Okay. Whew. Okay, I'm back. Look, the Baja 1000 isn't about fame or money. It's about being a part of history and racing down the same stretch of Earth that gave birth to a sport. And the Baja 1000 is still very much a family sport. I mean, yeah, there are father-son teams, but on a certain level, every single racer is responsible for one another. And with 52 years of history, there are racers that have been born with Baja racing in their blood. Baja's also made legends out of men like Mickey Thompson and Ivan Stewart and Mike Mouse McCoy, but there are thousands of other racers that you've never even heard of. And, if you care about the legacy and the tradition of Baja racing, or if you just want to see some awesome off-road vehicles go down the desert, then you should watch the Baja 1000 this weekend, and you should pick a team and support them. Look them up, like them on Facebook, buy a t-shirt, just let them know that someone somewhere in a random part of the world appreciates the hard work that they put into running this race. Speaking of appreciation, I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of you who watch this video, and you should consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. I'm just finishing up a whole bunch of content that's all about car stuff and the stories behind anything from minivans to, off-road races. So you can always hit the notification button and be the first to know when I post a new video.